So now, thank you so much, Ertugrul. Now, Stephanie, she's doing this training online. She couldn't join, she's in Croatia. So I'm going to introduce Stephanie. Stephanie Krueger provides custom academic and consulting services for a variety of clients, including UCT Prague, CTU Prague's Open Mechanics Group, and the Czech National Library of Technology. She's concerned about waste in our world and the promise of cultural and environmental research. She serves as the editorial advisory board of Evidence-Based Library and Information Practice, Young Information Scientist, and the Spirit of Bosnia. Stephanie's first job in academic libraries were as a student assistant, undergraduate and graduate studies, and she's worked since then with academic libraries around the world. First in the context of Ithaca projects, JSTOR, ArtStore, DRAM, and later at the NTK, the National Library of Science and Technology. Here you go, Stephanie.
Hello. Thank you so much for the introduction, Katya. And I'm so pleased to be with you virtually today. I think as the Hermes Project and other such global sharing initiatives have shown us, as well as the COVID epidemic, that this kind of distance instruction and distance interaction can work effectively. I'll make my presentation a little bit shorter so that you can stay on track today. I know you have several other workshops this afternoon. So it will be a little bit less than, let's say, I'm looking at the clock, 20 minutes, and then we'll have about 5 minutes for discussion and for answering the survey. We'll have another QR code activity at the end of the presentation. And just because we have such a short time today, I'd ask you to hold your questions until the end of the session. Feel free to contact me via email if you have any questions following my presentation. And there's a lot of words on my slides. This is because this is a training presentation, so the slides are meant to complement the actual lecture that I'm giving today. So if you have any problems reading anything on the screen, don't worry. We're recording this session today, and you'll be able to go and read all of the slides, review all the slides, look at them again in your own time, print them out, read them on your phone when you go home. So you'll have the slides available to you. So please don't worry if there's something you can't read. I'll highlight things on the screen, but that you can go back and study later. One thing I think when you're a document delivery and resource sharing professional is that you can view the library oftentimes through the perspective of your own organizational structure. So if you're working mostly in interlibrary loan, as some of you do, I think oftentimes you can lose sight of the individuals that you're working with from a larger perspective. So I was asked to provide some case studies to you all about people that I actually work with on a daily basis. Most of these people are doctoral students, researchers, mostly in scientific fields, and postdoctoral researchers, so early career researchers, and also people who are already professors who have established careers and who are, managing research groups and whatnot. So I was asked to tell you a little bit about these people and, from my perspective, what kinds of information needs they have to give you some context to when you're fulfilling individual requests, if you're using the platform, for example, that Hermes is developing, that you will be able to understand why people need such things that they're asking and requesting from the, from your library for other libraries around the world. So just to give you a little bit of perspective of how people are working and actually, how their needs might be different than what you imagine, or, many of you, I'm sure, are not working as researchers. Some of you may be, but it's a little bit different than the work we do in libraries. So when you're working with the PhD plus community, you have to understand that there's a spectrum of mentorship that's happening from the doctoral student, and here you see an example of a student that I've actually worked with. Her name has been changed to protect her privacy, as with the other students. She's an international student. I'm sure many of you work with these people. She's doing a doctorate outside of her home country. English is her second language, but she has to work in English. She has to use resources in English, and she's actually working in a chemistry field. So all of the literature that she's working with is in English and not in her native language, which is Spanish. And she has many life needs, and we'll go into a little bit more detail about these. But her life needs include, first and foremost, finishing her PhD dissertation, taking any coursework that's involved in that. And at her particular university, she has to prepare for state exams. And also, if she's successful in that, then she's allowed to write and defend her dissertation. And I'll highlight in a moment where she needs information resources for that. I'll also be talking about postdoctoral researchers. Here's a colleague I actually work with. He's a postdoctoral researcher in mechanics. It's a field of physics related to physics and mathematics. And he's already done doctoral work. He's completed that, and his mentors have advised him to do postdoctoral work in 2 different countries. He himself was a postdoc in France and also in the Czech Republic, his home country. And he's currently building his skills for academia. His goal is to be an academic professor, but he also has some programming skills. So he's also interested in doing a career outside of academia if he needs to. But right now his main focus in making that decision is either becoming a full-time professor, and there are very few positions in his area available. So will he be able to do that or not? In order to become a professor in his field, he has to get his first grant project and become a principal investigator, so-called PI, which means he actually has to look for funding for his research through funding agencies. And if he's not successful in this quest, he'll actually have to leave academia. Who knows if he'll end up in academia or not? And then you have the established researchers. These are people who've already gone through that work. In the sciences, many of them have had to get funding, get their first grant projects in order to get permanent tenured positions. They've had to do a lot of scholarly publishing, and they work a lot with other researchers in their field. So a lot of their work is involved in their particular niche of interest. In this case, this person is actually a toxicologist who works internationally in different areas of toxicology. And they need to not only do their own research, but they do a lot of teaching and mentoring of PhD candidates and postdoctoral researchers primarily, but also teaching bachelor and master students. So these people are extremely busy. And one thing I want you to take away from this slide is these people are quite busy. You see they've got lots of things going on. And what I think libraries underestimate is that many of these people think that they're information literate, but that they oftentimes overestimate their research and searching abilities. And they may not come to the library and ask the library for help until they really need something, be it a document delivery request or help for doing a task that their mentor, for example, isn't helping them with, such as writing their first article. So I think those of you who work on the front lines of your libraries, I want to make you aware of these things and some resources that could help. And I think that libraries' overarching goal is to elegantly fill the information-related gaps for these people when we can catch them, either at the desks. Sometimes it's when they send an email request to us. Sometimes we meet them at some kind of professional event that's going on at our library or on campus. And some of you may need to reach out actively to work with these people. In the early days of my work with some of my research colleagues, I was actually reaching out to them and saying, hey, would you like to have coffee with me? We can talk about how the library can help you. I want to learn how the library can help you better, so that we could promote our services more actively to them. those services can include resource sharing and interlibrary law. Yes. And for you as a librarian, many of you may not have a PhD, you may just have a bachelor or master's degree. I think that's okay from my perspective, but I think what's really is important is that throughout your career you have curiosity and that you're willing to learn about what the people on campus are doing. In areas that are outside your comfort zone or your area of expertise, the more you learn about these people and their interests, the better that you can serve them as a librarian in fulfilling requests, in actively working with them, and I would really encourage you to keep learning throughout your career because it can take you then places and help you serve your patrons in a way you may not have been able to before. I find myself still learning, and I find this one of the most exciting and interesting things about the work that I'm doing right now. Okay, where does library information come together with these things that these people are doing? When people are writing a dissertation, they need to actually have information. I'll skip this slide. So they actually have to find a dissertation topic and find something original and an appropriate methodology. I've identified here on this table a mixture of things, academic resources that they might need, but we talked about open today in the introductory sessions from Ertugrul and from Silvana. There are a lot of, it's a hybrid environment right now with a lot of open academic resources and a lot of subscription resources offered by the library. So you have to be aware of both things to help people if they come to the desk with you with a topic. For example, if they come to a service desk and ask, I need help on my dissertation refining the research topic, you have to be able to answer and tell them, you know, these are places you can go before you can get into a more in-depth discussion with them and to facilitate additional conversations, consultations, and so on. So here I've highlighted, so as a library, what we can offer to people for PhD candidates and above, as we'll get to in a few moments, we can help them really with finding their original research topic, seeing what others have written. We can help them refine their research methodology and provide them articles and books to help them with these two tasks. We can also help them very much in researching and writing their doctoral dissertation. Some of you may subscribe to subscription resources such as ProQuest Dissertation and Theses Global Dissertation Archive. If not, ILL is here, and you're received in Hermes colleagues, and this network of resource sharers around the world can really help your PhD students in finding them dissertations by others, if they're not subscribing, for example, to ProQuest. Some dissertations are, however, these days openly provided online, but not all of them. And it can be hard to find some of those open dissertations, so you should be aware of this as well, that some things are open, some things you can find through the library network, the resource sharing network, and some things are subscription resources. You can also email authors of dissertations directly. If you're fulfilling requests, you may know about this. I think some people are shy to email the writers of dissertations, but if their dissertation isn't openly available, if you can't get it through ILL or if it's not on ProQuest. But in my experience, it's been really easy for most researchers that I've helped in getting the dissertation to actually just take up the courage, email the author if you can find their email address online somewhere, and oftentimes they'll share the whole thing with you. Not even just a chapter or a section. I find that to be extremely helpful if needed, and sometimes you can overcome some of the copyright challenges that you'll hear about in other sessions today. And then the information skills needed. These are skills ideally the PhD student in this case should have, but I actually think you as librarians should have these skills as well. So if you see some skills on the slides that you don't feel comfortable that you have, I encourage you to get these skills. These include traditional library things such as advanced database searching in English. I know English isn't your first language for many of you. However, if you're working with scientists in particular, you know that the global language currently for the moment is English. Most of my colleagues in the Czech Republic and Croatia communicate exclusively in English. They're writing exclusively in English. Unfortunately, this is the situation, but be aware of what databases you have across disciplines where you can really help people. And if you're having problems searching as doing document delivery or trying to help somebody with a bigger search, I think these resources can be really helpful, the databases themselves, in helping you identify keywords and identifying keywords in English that you might not know or be able to help, or some phrases for searching that are different than in your own language. So I encourage you to play around with as many databases as possible, learn about them, and again, you'll be able to serve your patrons much more effectively. If you have time, always I think it's a good idea to learn about what's going on your campus. If you're working with particular PhD students at a particular school or a research group, know about what kind of coursework they have to have so that you can have some backup, so that you can know what they commonly need in terms of databases and tools, books, ebooks, and other specialized resources. And I think familiarize yourself, if you haven't, with the structure of scientific articles, so that you can better understand this kind of publishing environment that the scholars are working in. So be able to read an article yourself, you'll be able to help people more easily understand what scientific articles are. I know in the case of the PhD student whose picture I showed you, she's kind of from a younger generation, and I had to work with her in the early days of explaining what a journal article actually is, because she's never held a print journal. She's young enough that she's exclusively worked with online journals, so she wasn't aware, for example, how they're structured, how they fit together in a journal issue. What is a journal issue? Is a journal volume? These are some of the questions our newer students are coming at us with because they're grown up in an online-only environment. You should also be aware of any university repositories you have, because these people might come ask you for help with publishing their dissertation, and some of you might have services already existing where you support them in publishing their dissertation in open repositories. If not, I encourage you to go read. If there are any of these kind of research areas that are unfamiliar to you, I additionally wanted to mention I've included links here to a tool I created, which is called STEMskiller, which provides links to existing resources on various topics and activities that scholars and researchers are dealing with, that are available from universities all around the world that are in English, that students and their mentors can use in an open, self-service way in order to find information about educating themselves with the goal of, completing their PhD, becoming an early career researcher, and either becoming a professor or going into the public sector, or private sector. Okay, we don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to move on quickly here. Just note that on this slide, I've included some useful links to tools that may help you if you get a question at the desk or virtually again about assisting a mentor with research and teaching, PhD candidate, writing proposals and articles, and writing conference abstracts and presenting at conferences. I do a lot of work in terms of writing, so I think what I wanted to highlight here, in addition to traditional textbooks, print and electronic, never forget that we still have both in this world. There are a lot of really interesting and exciting, particularly in these three areas, open resources, including open textbooks and open educational resources, things that are produced, for example, by the Khan Academy. MIT OpenCourseWare has been around for a long time, but it's really fantastic in terms of introductory statistics, introductory mathematics. A lot of, if you're working with science and research people, you can guide them to really useful resources there. And a lot of my people, because I'm working in a non-native English environment, as many of you will be, I find that the AI writing tools are getting better and better. So things like Grammarly, that there's a lot of, you know, hype that adds around that, whatever, but a lot of my colleagues actually work with these tools. Their universities are starting to subscribe to them, and I think it's a good starting place for them, but they're not enough when it comes to writing scientific articles. So a lot of people I work with, if they just use these AI writing tools, they get the impression that maybe their writing is fantastic, but then they submit an article for peer review, and the article isn't accepted to the journal, and they wonder why, and it comes back with English language revisions. This may happen to some of you. You may hear about this. So I wanted to say they're not perfect. In that case, you have to be aware of how to help them with navigating that peer review process. Those of you who aren't in public services, of course, might not have to worry about that, but some of your requests might be in that area. So I wanted to make you aware of that. And yes, and if your university isn't subscribing to that tool and you're in a non-native English environment, I think that it's useful at some point to subscribe to something. I myself use an open source tool. It's called Language Tool, and that one I find works perfectly well, doesn't require subscription, and is something that you maybe want to check out for yourself. Also in, you know, again, learning about English searching keywords, and if there's like a journal article where you get a request, you don't know what it's about, and you need to write an English email to a colleague, those tools can be super helpful. Okay, so I've gone over a lot of this stuff. We have limited time, so I'll skip with this. Here, many of the information needs for postdoctoral researchers and then for established researchers are actually really similar to PhD candidates, what we just saw, but they're doing a lot more of everything. So they're writing more articles, writing more research proposals, and so on. So where the library can really help them, in my opinion, is, again, if they have something weird, document delivery and interlibrary loan that they come across that they don't find on Sci-Hub, they don't find online, the library, you'll probably interact with them at that point. I also find that these people, both early career researchers and doctoral researchers, file a lot of book requests. So if you're getting the book requests, many of them probably come from these people, and you may know them. And they're usually kind of obscure things that they're not able to get somewhere else. And that's where we can really help these patrons and help them through ILO and other forms of research sharing if they're open to getting a book chapter. Most of them, particularly in the scientific fields, have no problem with the electronic version. Most of the people I work with would prefer the electronic version over print. You may still have colleagues that like the print book. I myself like the old-fashioned print book, but most of the colleagues I work with want the electronic version, and they find it easier to work with. So just be aware of that. And another thing, you may have heard of ORCID at some of your libraries and the research identifiers. Some of your universities may be offering identifiers and things like this. But why this is important is because once these people become researchers and early career researchers, they have to become public figures and become more and more visible online. So in my research group, I help them not only in the kind of traditional library-related stuff, getting, you know, if they need help with researcher ID, what is Scopus ID, what is an ORCID, but I help them setting up a Google Scholar profile, setting up LinkedIn, reviewing their LinkedIn profile, giving them examples, setting up ResearchGate, and reviewing their web pages. And this is important to them when they start applying for grant funding because they need to be visible, or academic or other jobs. They need to be visible, they need to be kind of public figures. And yes. And don't forget, I know that there's a new library, I think, that you're visiting there. The library spaces can be used and leveraged as places to meet these people. So if you feel that your library is quite distant from some of these PhD plus candidates, which they may be, particularly in STEM, at the National Library of Technology in Prague, who actually created an academic lounge. This is more common in places like the US or the UK. You may have one at your library, but if you don't, I'd highly encourage you to think about an old-fashioned physical space where people can interact and meet. And our space was open much of the time during COVID. We had some restrictions on it, but people were still coming, using it. It was open most of the time. So it was still a place where people, if they were getting kind of by themselves and distant during the COVID pandemic, you know, lonely and things like this, they could actually have a place to go meet with selected colleagues if they tested okay and all of this. And it worked really well. And you can promote your library resources there. All right, so tenured professors have even more. I want to stay on track for you in terms of time. So I will have Ertugrul, he'll talk about my QR question. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. And if you'd like to learn more about any of these topics and what researchers do, I encourage you to go to STEMfiler and explore all the resources there, and let me know if you have any question at all. I'll be happy to help you. So thank you very much for your time. Ertugrul, there's the QR code that I'm supposed to remind people about.
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie. And also, I would like to ask, do you have any question? Just you can give the mic and you can answer on the spot. Does anyone have any question?
They're ready for their break. Yeah.
I think so. Yeah. Ertugrul, would you like to check the... Yes.
Any other things while we're waiting for the question? For those of you who work with students that you'd like to share with your colleagues? No. Time for the coffee break.
I think you don't have any problem to access the Menti platform. Not open? Please try it again. Or you can use my copy. Is 29 response.
Yeah, excellent.
And this is the word cloud. You can also use
share the screen so that she can.
with her. Yes.
Yeah, so she can see the.
Ah, yes, you are right.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, this one. This one.
This one, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think you can see the screen now, Stephanie.
I can, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
There is no word for your word cloud.
User focus. Good. There's one. That's great. User focus, I do feel it's the name of the game. Yeah, helpful learning, and yes, working with our patrons, curiosity. Good. They're coming.
Yes.
Excellent. I like them all. They're moving. Yeah. So really go back and read my slides. We had so much to cover in a short time. And I'm really, if there's anything you want to discuss with me, feel free to reach out to me individually. I do most of my work with these people individually over Zoom, so I'm happy to even talk with you if you have a question. Fantastic.
Okay. Shall I turn off the screen,
Yes.
Stephanie? I think
I think
we
so. I think it's fine.
at the end of the day, I'm going to share all the questions and answers and word clouds to the audience, okay?
Okay, fantastic. So thank you again. all
You are very
for
welcome.
joining us.
Stage is
Okay,
yours.
Enjoy your conference. Yes, bye.
Thank you, Stephanie. So now we are going to have a break. I think everyone is ready for the